Well, glad to have you here. Again, I'm recording this, and so if you have concerns about confidentiality, you may not have your video or your name can be changed, whatever you're comfortable with. So that's the disclaimer. I invite everyone, if you have questions, you can put those in the chat in the bottom. After I share some different things I'm going to share, or along the way, you're welcome to ask questions. In between sharing different things I will be sharing, then you can raise your hand and we can have a two-way conversation and do that. So you're welcome to do that. So in review briefly, I had something I wanted to review. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so yesterday I wrote it out, but just as a quick review, the foundation of healthy open communication is safety, and that includes being vulnerable and trusting. And part of that is to start out with talking about what your goal is and your purpose and why. After that is established and understood, then you know that you can be a team working together going toward this same goal. And the process is how you do that. That includes where and when. And I shared examples of what that is. In my office, the coaching I do as a coach and as a counselor, 80% of that is the process, teaching communication skills and tools. I will be presenting some today and tomorrow, well, this week, some communication skills and tools about what those are. But obviously I can't be here coaching everyone at the same time, but something I present in about 5 or 10 minutes here will take an hour to 2 hours in my office, because then we actually practice and go through the exercise together. When the safety is in place and you have the same goal working together and you've agreed on the process, then the content can be talked about. Anything can be talked about when you have enough safety. So I just wanted to review that concept because that's a foundation. And also the bad wolf, good wolf, we talked about that. And the idea is it's never safe when the bad wolf is present. You have to get out of the bad wolf to have a healthy and healing communication. And so the rule is, if it's not safe, don't do it. If you're in the bad wolf, take a time out until you can get the good wolf back in. If you were to come to my office, you would perhaps see me grab out of my drawer a heart rate monitor that, like they do at the doctor's office, putting on the finger and check the heart rate. The studies show that if your heart rate is above 100 beats per minute, you're not in the resting state, you're in fight or flight mode. And then that's the bad wolf, the survival part. So it's important to make sure your heart rate is down to have good conversation. I encourage all couples to have their heart rate below 90 to even attempt a good conversation. Unless there's a fire, then it's time to scream and yell. But actually that slows people down. So it's even better in a fire to talk directly without screaming, because you'll get better results getting people's mind to be able to process to get out of the danger. So keep your heart rate low. And that is one of the process interventions with couples, is when they get too wound up, to stop and take their heart rate. You put your fingers there or on your wrist, wherever, and measure your heart rate. And it needs to be down to your normal rate, or at least within 10 beats would be ideal. So that's a review, a little bit of that. Okay, so I want to review the questions that are on the docket for tonight. Successful communication. What is an easy thing to change to improve my relationship? That's one question. Some of that answer to that, really, it's individual between every couple on what it's easy to do to improve communication. For some, as I talked about last night, is changing some of the words you use from always and never to mostly always and mostly never, or using many but not all and never. I mean, that's a simple, easy change, for example, of that. What is the most important thing to know to have successful communication? And actually, the main answer to that, the most important thing is to make sure that there is safety. And so we talked about that last night, reviewed today. And so safety is fundamental and the most important thing to have good open communication. Now, there's other things we'll get into about how to make it more effective and more efficient. So one question is, how can I get my partner to listen to me? So that's, again, connected with that is to help them feel safe and trust, and to invite them toward the goal that you have that they can get on board with, and then you can work as a team and it's easier to listen. I just had a couple this morning excited to share. It was good to see them. It'd been 2 months. We worked for a couple months and they improved a lot. And so we had a checkup this morning, and they said that they have used half of the skills that they learned and they're being successful, even though they know there's potential to do even more. But as far as getting the partner to listen, Jill, so Jack and Jill are my generic names. Jill realized and reported that when she went in last night and accosted her husband with an issue that had been kind of simmering, that as soon as she accosted him and told him what was going on with her, she realized that was a very poor start and had the opportunity then to back up and start over with that. And so that made it safer. So talking about the goal, her husband shared how much difference it made when she first accosted him. You know, as most of us men are, is that when we hear a problem given to us immediately, our first response is to hear that there's a problem that I'm supposed to fix. And I understand with most women that that is not the case unless it's directly stated. And so that makes a big difference, is to state the goal. Like when you come and say, hey, I just need you to listen, or I just want you to hear me out, or I have a problem I want to talk about and I want you to hear the whole thing. So that's part of the process, is setting the stage to identify and work as a team, talking about what the goal is at the beginning. Telling a man that you just want him to listen, and even better is after I talk and you listen, this is exactly what I want you to say, is that must be hard. Let me give you a hug. If that's what you want, if you can spell out exactly what kind of response you want, then you're more likely to get the response that you want. Not guaranteed, but certainly telling him gives it a higher probability. He's not going to read your mind or guess unless you've been through the training and practice before with that. How can I change the things I'm tired of in the relationship and make it fun again? Okay, so that's the main one I'm going to spend the next bit about talking, is how to change things in the relationship. And I want to add in here, in the relationship between you and your spouse, but also in the relationship with you and you, because that is a big important part of the relationship, is how you're feeling and how you're doing with yourself and life, how you're managing life, because how you show up in the relationship has a big influence. Here's the elements of change. There are 3 main elements of change. Whenever we want change, these are the basic components. Of course, if a person does not have the desire or the commitment, taking action for the change is not going to happen. Okay, so that part's easy to understand. If a person has the desire and the commitment to take action, then they're going to work at it. So that's the good wolf. The good wolf makes a commitment, and because of integrity begins to work on it and continue until that change has occurred and hopefully maintained. We do have a tendency to get lazy, so some habits take extra work. And as we do that, then we can make that a new habit. With that desire, the next part is if you are working hard for a change and it's not happening, then often what is missing is the understanding. We call that the education. And that goes back to the process or the how to make the change. And that's a multi-million dollar industry on how to get fit and get in shape and lose weight. And we just passed January. Statistically, 80% of all people that started a diet is done with it by now until next January. So that's why it's helpful to get education. And as far as that topic of losing weight, there's lots of different opinions. So with that, I would also suggest that you have to experiment and try with different things and trust your gut on what feels good and what you're motivated to do. A poor plan enacted is better than zero plan. And so you experiment and do things with that until you feel like you're making progress toward whatever goal that is. It's also possible that you do know how to make the change and you have desire and commitment to do that, but we are also influenced by others. And so an important part of that is support. And I also put not sabotage. So if I'm crossing the street and there's three big guys on the other side of the street that say I'm not going to come across the street, they're going to win. But if I have a whole football team on my side and they can give me support, then I'm going to make it across the street, even though there might be three guys saying they don't want me to make it there. Maybe that's a silly example, but support. I often work with spouses and individuals who have addiction issues, whether that be drugs and alcohol or internet addiction and pornography and things like that. And it's really helpful to have support to overcome those addictions. And so when you have a goal you're working toward, you're motivated for that and committed to that, and you know how, then it helps to have support for that. So with that support, now, like I mentioned before, the good wolf is good at making commitments and with integrity following through in working and changing those habits. Now, the bad wolf is not. We all have that part of us, that survival part of us, and we're into comfort and spoiling ourselves. And in most cases, when it comes to change, we don't want to change. As a matter of fact, when it comes to survival, psychologically speaking, the unknown is more scary than known pain. And that's true for any change. So how do we motivate the bad wolf, that part of us that is afraid of the unknown? And that is through increasing our desire and commitment. It's simple and yet profound as we apply that principle. So the bad wolf doesn't care about change unless there's a reward or there are painful situations that we want to get out of. Psychologically speaking, we are motivated twice as much to get out of pain than we are to obtain a reward. So if you include both, then you have 3 times the chance of making change, even when it's something you don't really want to, as long as you hold with a commitment to fulfill the reward and consequences that you've set up for yourself. So how does that work in a relationship? In a couple, for example, some couples, they come in and they talk about how when they get into fights, they start calling each other names and being very disrespectful and verbally abusive to each other. This is extreme cases, even though if you don't have that, you can still use the same principle, but it is a common one for a lot of couples that may come into the office. And so with the agreement prior to, it's strategizing ahead of time before the next event happens. And that's to attach pain and pleasure to the unwanted behavior. So making a list of unwanted words that are used or behaviors. This is also something good for parents, helping children make changes, good parenting. And in marriage, it seems like we're always parenting each other anyway. So that's a whole nother topic that we may cover in the next night. So probably Thursday. Okay, so if you have a list of unwanted behaviors that you want to eliminate, so the agreement would be, for example, and this is a process statement, process strategy, attaching that pain and pleasure. So with each word that is on the blacklist, you attach such as 2 minutes of chores, like cleaning the bathroom or scrubbing the toilet, picking up the dog poop out the backyard, or doing dishes, or whatever you put on the list as a quick chore, and something that you're willing to do to pay penance for the violation of the commitment that you have made to not use those words or to do that certain behavior. And so that would be the pain attached to that. With couples, so we set up that is if you call names, then you, within 30 minutes of that, for one, if you're doing that and you get into that, you're supposed to take a break. And that's when you can go make up for the behavior that you agreed not to do anymore. So you go do your chores, and then hopefully that helps you calm down, get your heart rate down, and you get the good wolf back, and you can go back and communicate. Part of the pleasure of that might be if we go 7 days without that behavior, then the reward would be the spouse would give like a 30-minute back rub or foot rub. The last couple I did that with, he didn't like his feet rubbed, but he really liked to have his head rubbed. So that was something he was looking forward to if his wife violated the agreement that they had. You want to figure out what it is motivating for you. Now, for myself, as a father, there are times where I have gotten frustrated at my children, and using this principle of pain and pleasure. So without the principle, I told myself to the good wolf, I said, I need to stop yelling so much at the kids. And so I tried and I worked at it. I was committed to that. And over 6 months, I probably reduced by 20%, which is good progress, but certainly not enough if you want to completely eliminate the yelling there. And so what I have done using that principle is to put some dollar bills in my pocket. And I tell the kids, as long as you're respectful, if I ever yell at you, you can respectfully put your hand out like that. And that means I will give you $1. And I'm pretty motivated not to just give money out of my pocket to my kids for no reason other than my poor behavior. I think the last time I set that deal up, I spent $3. And it's really effective for me to change that behavior. And so anytime I think that I need to do better, just thinking about it often curbs my behavior in that thing. And so that's what I do there. In the beginning, using this principle as far as the whole family, when my kids were younger, the kids, you know how they always bicker and fight and quarrel, is he started it. No, she started it. No, he started it. So a little parenting here is, so we had a family meeting, and using this principle, my wife made a batch of cookies. And actually, what I'll actually draw it out here real quick. So part of marital success is also parenting unity and success. And so that's important. So using that principle, we made a chart like this, pretty simple. And what we did was we had clips and a clothespin actually, and with each clothespin, we had our names on those clothespins. So this was green paper, this was yellow, kind of followed the stoplight, and red, and then we had black. So over time, I mean, it's hard to eliminate the bickering with children at times. And so by setting up this chart, the deal was with the kids is if your clip is in the green when lunch comes around, you get to have a cookie after lunch. And then the same with after dinner. If you're in the green, you got to have a cookie. So anytime the children yelled, it was the agreement, even with the parents, that the children could respectfully say, do you want to move your clip or do you want me to? And that's the same with the kids to each other and the parents to the kids, is when yelling occurred, is to ask that. And most of the time they would move their own clip if they wanted to, because they didn't want someone else doing that. That just went out. There we go. So what we had is a list of chores, like similar to what I mentioned before, as a consequence, doing like 5 minutes of dishes or scrubbing the kitchen floor or cleaning the bathroom. You better believe the first time I violated that, when I was scrubbing the toilet, the kids were all outside the door giggling and laughing at Dad scrubbing the toilet because he raised his voice. And so it was amazing, the results. Within 3 days, all quarreling stopped and we had peace in the house, where we were eating cookies all the time, which was great. It was worth it. And we ate cookies for a couple of weeks. Then we went on to some other behaviors that we were working on. So that was very effective. And that, 6 months later, I can't say there wasn't some quarreling and bickering, but it was still less than half of what it had been 6 months previous. So I think finishing the conversation on this, if you yelled once, you went to the yellow, you missed out on the cookie, but you didn't have to do a chore. If you did it twice, then you got to do one chore. And if you went to the black, you got an additional chore. So then you had a total of 3 chores to do if you got into the black, 1 for the red and 2 for the black. And then, of course, each time the cookies were served to those who were in the green, everyone got reset back to the green, a new start. So that was helpful to have a new start twice a day. So that's using the principle. This principle always works, as long as far as the pain and the pleasure, creating those elements of change. And the key is just to up the ante each time until you get the change, you get the results. I do have a few more stories I'm reminded here on my notes to talk about, because our survival part as human beings, we really get into habits a lot. And so that's how we motivate ourselves to change, to create new habits, to eliminate poor habits. And that's true in the marital relationship, as we get in these patterns. And so it's important to identify those patterns we want to change. We cannot depend on our commitment when there's emotion involved. Our emotion gets involved, that's our survival part. With emotion, we go back into what we have practiced. That's why we're grateful for emergency personnel. And when I was in the military, we would practice. That's why sports teams practice. And so what you practice is what you're going to do in the relationship. So I have a couple stories to share with that. One is, I have a nephew that a few years back went through the police academy, and he came and shared the story about how the training used to be as opposed to how they upgraded it. It became very important because it saved lives. So similar to the military, they would be at the range practicing shooting their .45 so they can get better shots, so they can hit their target that they intend to. But also, so in the training before, it used to go like this: shoot, 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 pick up your brass, all the casings from the shells after they shoot. Shoot, 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 pick up your brass, shoot, 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 pick up your brass. And when they did that, what they found later, unfortunately, the officers found dead from a live firefight with brass in their hands. On video, it showed the officers, when they ran out of bullets, instead of reloading first, they would pick up the brass first. Very dangerous, and it costs lives. So they changed the training just a little bit. Shoot, 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 reload, shoot. We're all done. Now pick up your brass. That little change saved lives. And you think about when you've got an argument with your spouse, how often have we found ourselves saying things or reacting in ways that we do not want to react? So practicing is a very key element. For one, as we talked about the elements of change, you want to motivate yourself with pain and pleasure. But another big part of that is practicing. I came across this principle serendipitously, however that is, you know what I mean, serendipitously. So one day, I don't even remember what I was upset about, but as I was in the garage, I was upset about something, and I decided in that moment I was going to go share this with my wife. And so at this particular time, she was in the bathroom brushing her hair, and I came in and I verbally accosted her. It wasn't even about her. Fortunately, because it wasn't personal and about her, I had just enough brain cells working, because I was wound up, to recognize that what I had just done really caught her off guard. And seeing that, I froze in my tracks. I stopped and I walked backwards, and I said, "That was bad. Let me try that again." And so I approached her again. I was still wound up, and I did better, but with a twinkle in her eye, she looked at me and says, "That was better, but do it again." And so I walked backwards again, and I did it again. And she said, "That was better, but try this different." So on the fourth time that I did that, I was grateful that I got it good enough where she was just giggled, and we were able to end that with a hug and a kiss and some giggles, because obviously I had done very badly and we solved it very quickly. And so this is something I share with just about every couple, is to use that principle of practice. So I call that the old Blockbuster intervention, where it used to say on the old video, VHS, "Be kind, rewind." So anytime you find yourself in a situation that went badly, even if you recognize it a whole week later, maybe it takes a week for you to realize, hey, I really need to do better with that. As soon as, whether it's a week or 3 days or 1 day or 2 hours or 10 minutes, when you recognize you've done badly and that's a repeated pattern of your emotional self with agreement with your spouse, then you go back and recreate this scenario and practice doing it the correct way, the kind way. So you rewind and practice that. Now, the key element is at least 3 times practice how you want that to go. And some couples, you still have to practice the same thing over and over again until you get it correct. So that's reminding that you don't need to pick up the brass in the middle. You got to, some things you need to take a time out for, some things you just need to walk away. And that's the same principle of practice, whether anytime you're emotional. And now I use that same principle with addiction as well, is you must practice a healthy response. And so by practicing, then you're training yourself to do better. Now, the reality is we often think that we're out of control, but 99 million times out of 1, no one's gonna, when you're in the heat of the moment, if I handed you a gun, you are not gonna shoot your spouse. We feel like we're out of control, but if I handed you a gun, it's like, what? That's an intervention. because it gets you into different thinking. I'll never do that. I won't do that. Of course, I worked in a prison and helped individuals who actually had done that. They obviously were not in control. And that's why they had a lot of external control, because they mismanaged their own. But that's the principle of pain and pleasure motivation. If you came to me and said, if you will crawl on your hands and knees across town, and that might be 5 miles, I said, I'm not going to do that. That my knees would be all bloody and that would be sore before I even get across the street. But if you said, if you crawl on your hands and knees across town and you're there before midnight and you start in the morning and there'll be $1 million waiting for you across town, I'm already 2 blocks down the road, even on my hands and knees, because even though that would be painful to crawl and get my knees all bloody and scarred, the pain of that is overridden by the believed pleasure of what I could accomplish with that reward. And so the principle is there. I call it the $1 million principle. Is motivation comes from a big enough reward. Stephen Covey, in just matter of principle, when it comes to setting boundaries and making agreements and commitments with other people, including our spouse, that it's easy to say no when we have a bigger yes. So that is an important principle to be able to figure out, is why, what is your bigger yes to the positive behaviors, so you can say no to the negative or unwanted behaviors, whether that's in yourself or others, to set a boundary. And unfortunately, I would say 3/4 of the time, couples come into my office, there's behaviors that needed to be changed for 20 years, and finally, and the spouse says, I'm done putting up with your bad behavior, and therefore I'm going to divorce you. And so then the other spouse, recognizing, hey, they're really serious this time. They get motivated because they never believed the consequence before, but now, now I'm going to take action because I don't want that pain and that separation. So couples come to me, well, why did they wait till this long? Well, why did you wait till you got really serious about setting that boundary of the unwanted behavior? If you struggle with that, I recommend the classic book. Even the first edition was in the early 1980s. It's been reprinted a dozen times. Its simple title is Boundaries. And so it's a good one to read and reread. I have one client that's read that 10 times, like every month in the last year. And it helps to remind yourself of changes and to keep working on it, keep the motivation, and keep your education fresh in your mind. And so some of those things, because it's so foreign perhaps to your patterns, you have to review and review and practice until you begin to see the results of new behaviors and new results and change in the patterns of your relationship. But I tell you, it is worth it. It's worth the investment, because you can make the relationship better. That will always improve as you improve on your ability to clarify and set boundaries. That is equal to your ability to also improve your relationship, to manage that with yourself and with your spouse. So that's an important part. So reload as needed and pick up the brass when you're all done. Be kind, rewind. Okay, so I want to share another little sketch. I used to share this all the time. It's actually been a few years since I've shared this, but it's a fun little view. And so here's Jack. We'll put that Jack. And here is Jill, okay, for short. So talking about the goals in marriage and our vision of what marriage is supposed to be like, it's important. The example I shared last night was one of you coming into the marriage having played basketball and the other played football, and you've got to learn to play soccer together. This is a similar concept. So as Jack looks to the future and what an ideal relationship is, looks at that, as Jill looks to her future on what an ideal relationship is, we think that we have the same vision when we're working toward our goals. And when we get to know someone, when we were dating and getting to know them, the more we got to know about each other, the closer we grew toward each other. And so we think, hey, this is great. The more I get to know them, the closer I'm getting to my goal. And all is bliss for a while. We go through the honeymoon period, and there's a point of that at the end of the honeymoon period where we begin to learn that continued direction toward our goal that we had then begins to take us further apart. And so that's where it's important to reevaluate what those goals are. So what we do is we take and we cross out the ideal and we keep the real part of it with each. And so we bring that part of the real and that part of the real relationship together. And so as we identify what a game of soccer is like, then we are working toward the same goal because we are defining it together. And now we're getting better, closer together toward the same goal. So in the beginning, we believe we are, but that's actual fantasy because we're not aware of that. So as we learn that, and okay, for those of you who have a religious foundation, I would add to this that whatever your real perception is or not, if you put Christ at the center of your relationship and you both work toward becoming more godly, more Christ-like, then you both will grow closer together and make progress faster in having a unified marriage by putting him at the center of your life and your goals. Also, an interesting thought, if you look down here at the base, if you're focused on each other, in a sense, you're putting your spouse before God, and you're going to be disappointed, and that's going to cause problems. But if you put God first and your spouse second, then you'll always be working and getting closer together. Because this focus here has stress in it because it's not a perfect union yet. Okay, so that's restructuring your goals and redesigning what marriage is and what family is between the two of you. I had a couple this morning that was admitting, and they're doing really well now, and they've been married about 15 years now, and they said, I'm just beginning to realize that my spouse is not just an extension of me or not just a redesigned person like I am. They're actually a different person than me. We all chuckled at that and had a good laugh. So often we treat our spouse like they're just a different version of ourselves. And so the sooner we recognize, and I'm still in process with doing that myself, it's an ongoing process of being able to differentiate that we are separate. And actually, the more separate that we recognize we are from our spouse, the more unified we can become with them, because with that awareness, we can honor the differences and honor their perspectives and opinions with more respect and support, valuing that their perspective broadens your own and expands your own experience with life and with relationship. It's a much richer experience. All right. So there's another fun thing I like to share about commitment in marriage. I'm sure I'll bring up commitment again more, but this is a fun thing from quantum physics, is a thing called 0-point field. I better do a smaller box. This is an interesting concept as you think about your relationship and emotion and energy in the relationship. The scientists have discovered, and how they describe this 0-point field is if you have a cubic foot, a box, that this box, whatever a cubic foot is there, if you take the yin and the yang of the universe, the energy that goes this way, it's perfectly balanced right here at the center. That's called 0 point. That's where it's all perfectly balanced. Now, if you took one side and joined with the other side, and you took that resistance out and put it all one direction, they say that the energy in that would vaporize the planet in less than a second. That's how much potential energy they say that is at this point being balanced. And because of that balance, they're then, and I'm not sure how they do this, but they can give input to this side of the box and they can measure the output on that side of the box. And by measuring that, so they have one unit, whatever one unit is, so there's thought energy. So if you have one man who puts 1 unit of energy, mental, let's see, one man puts 1 mental energy units into that, he gets 1 unit out. If you have 2 men, which gives you 2 mental energy units in, you get 1 unit out. Or 3 men is 3 mental energy units. You still only get 1 unit of energy out of that. And the same is true also if you have 1 woman with 1 mental energy, you get 1 unit. And the same as well, 2 women, 2 mental energies, you get 1 unit. Now, here's the fascinating to me as a marriage counselor is if you have 1 man and 1 woman, so that gives you 2 mental energies, you get 3.2 units of energy out of that. So somehow joining the 2 sexes in unity gives that much energy out of that. Even more fascinating is if you have 1 man and 1 woman, okay, with a committed relationship. So you still have 2 mental energies, but you add in the commitment with that, it now gives you 6 units of energy out of that 0 point. So to me, this partially explains why the research shows that when couples, even when couples live together even for a long time, 10 or 15 or even 20 years, how there's more power in the relationship when they're together, but something changes when a commitment is made. When couples get married, it changes the relationship. There was a study done years ago where they took couples that had never lived together 6 months before they were to get married, and they did the same survey 6 months after marriage. They also took couples that even lived together for several years, 6 months before marriage and 6 months after marriage, the same survey. And the question was, what does it take to have a successful marriage? So there's the group that's never lived together, and there's a group that are living together. You'd think they would have more experience that live together. But in both cases, the list of what was identified as what it takes to be successful in the marriage was 3 times longer in or 6 months after marriage than before marriage. Even couples, so our expectations change in relationship. That's also something as a hypnotherapist that I have observed with individuals, how commitment levels, there's just a different presentation in a relationship, whether couples are married or not. And I share this with couples. Half the couples I work with are not married and living together these days. And so we can help improve the relationship through the skills that I'm sharing. But to the bigger test is when you have more energy in a relationship. It's kind of like if you're driving a 4-cylinder car, maybe a starter car. It doesn't go very fast, but it gets you around town, as opposed to a very fast sports car. You can still get across the town, but there's so much more power with a sports car. You have to be more skilled of a driver to manage that power. And that's the same in a marriage, that the higher the commitment that you have, the more heaven you can create and the more hell there is in a relationship, because you have more power that you are managing. And so that's important to know, that there's that opportunity for greater bliss and joy and happiness in a committed relationship. You can only go so far with a level of commitment. How much fun does a person, like I mentioned last night, the difference between a backyard football player or a high school or a college or a professional football player? Each level of commitment brings different requirements to be successful and to be in the game. And there's a bigger reward the bigger the game is. All right. So we'll call that a night. Thank you for your participation. And again, you can just email me questions if you want to do it directly at rod@communicatinglove. Thank you for your participation, and thank you for your support.